On February 24th, 1915, Amanda Berry Smith passed away quietly in her sleep. She was 78 years old. Her funeral in Chicago drew thousands, ministers, orphans, believers of every color, all gathered to honor the woman who broke free not just from slavery, but from the limits the world tried to place on her. This world had been unkind to her from the very beginning. The land she was born into did not see her as human. The color of her skin wrote her story before she could hold a pen. And yet, somewhere deep within the heart of a little girl born enslaved in Maryland, God was already writing a different ending, one that would echo across continents. This is the story of Amanda Berry Smith, the woman who sang freedom from chains, who crossed oceans with nothing but faith, and who proved that no barrier, not race, not gender, not poverty, could stop a soul set on fire by God. Leave a like and subscribe so that the faith of others would also be encouraged by this message of power and grace. She was born on a cold winter morning, January 23rd, 1837, in Long Green, Maryland. Her parents, Samuel and Miriam Berry, were enslaved people. Her father, a laborer. Her mother, a house servant. They had 13 children. Life was a field of hardship, where each sunrise brought fear that someone might be sold, that another child might disappear. But Samuel Berry was not a man who bowed easily. He worked late into the nights, saving every extra penny until he bought freedom, first his own, then his wife's, then for their 5 eldest children. One by one, his family was redeemed. By the early 1840s, the Berrys moved north to York County, Pennsylvania. Free soil, but still shadowed by hatred. Their home became a secret station on the Underground Railroad. Amanda remembered hiding frightened men and women under mattresses, hearing dogs bark in the distance, and praying that God would silence their pursuers. Those early nights of fear and courage shaped her spirit. Even as a child, she understood the meaning of deliverance and the cost of it. Amanda didn't have much schooling, barely 3 months' worth, but she learned to read and write from her parents and the Bible they treasured. At 13, she was sent away to work as a domestic servant for a widow with 5 children. It was hard labor, and though she was technically free, she often felt the same chains her parents had escaped. But one night at a Methodist revival, she felt something stir within her, a whisper of grace that would not let go. It would take years before that seed blossomed into faith, but something had begun. When she was 17, Amanda married a man named Calvin Devine. She hoped it would bring her peace. It didn't. Calvin struggled with drinking, and their marriage was marked by sorrow and hardship. Their first child died shortly after birth. Their daughter, Maisie, survived, but Amanda often went hungry to feed her. Then came the Civil War. Calvin enlisted, perhaps seeking redemption in uniform, but never returned. He died in the fighting, and Amanda, not yet 30, became a widow. In the ruins of loss, something unexpected happened. Faith took root. Amanda began attending meetings of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the AME. There, surrounded by believers who had tasted both bondage and freedom, she encountered the living Christ. It wasn't the single moment of emotion, but a slow, burning awakening. Still, life did not grow easier. In 1863, she remarried a barber and deacon named James Smith, and they had 3 more children. But death followed closely behind. Within a few years, her husband and 4 of her 5 children were gone, taken by illness and poverty. She washed clothes for a living, standing in icy rivers, her hands raw and bleeding. At night, she prayed. Sometimes she wept until she couldn't speak, but she never turned away from God. One evening at a Holiness camp meeting, she heard a message about sanctification, a life wholly yielded to God. Amanda would later say it was as if heaven had opened and the Spirit descended. She stood up and began to testify, not as a victim, but as a vessel. Her voice, filled with both power and music, rolled through the crowd. People stopped to listen, and that night, Amanda Berry Smith discovered the purpose for which she had been born. But preaching was not something a woman, especially a black woman, was expected to do. Church leaders told her to be silent. Others mocked her, saying she was uneducated and poor. But Amanda could not be silent. When the fire burns, it must come out. She began preaching at camp meetings across Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Her sermons were simple but alive. She sang, she prayed, she told her story. Crowds gathered by the thousands. She spoke of a holiness that could purify the heart, of a Christ who could break every chain. And people listened. Some wept, others fell to their knees. She became known as the Singing Pilgrim. Still, behind the applause were nights of hunger and rejection. Often, she would preach all day and return to a tiny room to iron shirts or scrub laundry just to afford the next train ticket. She faced racism, sexism, and the skepticism of those who thought holiness was too bold for a washerwoman. Yet she pressed on. By the mid-1870s, her influence had grown. Even white congregations began inviting her to speak, something rare in that era. Her fame, however, was never her goal. Her goal was souls. She preached the message of sanctification and holiness with unshaken conviction that a person, no matter how broken, could be made new. In 1878, Amanda did something unheard of. She bought a ticket to England with her own savings from years of laundry work and set sail to preach overseas. She had no wealthy sponsor, no missionary board, just faith. She said, "The Lord sent me, and He will take care of me." When she arrived in Liverpool, crowds were already waiting. Word of the Negro Evangelist from America spread quickly through Britain's holiness circles. She preached in churches and camp meetings across London, Manchester, and even in Scotland. Audiences were captivated not only by her words, but by her songs, spirituals like "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," which carried the soul of her people and the sound of heaven. Some said Queen Victoria herself heard of her, though there's no proof she attended. Still, Amanda's ministry reached the ears of nobility and commoner alike. But Amanda's calling wasn't confined to England. In 1880, she traveled to India, where she preached for 3 years amid the heat, disease, and cultural barriers. She lived simply, often falling ill, yet continued to share the gospel in villages and missionary stations. From India, she sailed to Liberia, Africa, in 1885. For the first time, her feet touched the soil of her ancestors. It was as if the descendants of slaves had come full circle, returning not in chains, but in victory. Liberia was no easy mission. The heat was punishing. Yellow fever struck her twice. Local hostility was fierce. But Amanda pressed on. She preached in markets, schools, and churches, sometimes under trees, sometimes in hospitals. She cared for orphans, visited the sick, and baptized converts. Her sermons cut through tribal divisions and colonial arrogance alike. The woman who once scrubbed other people's clothes now washed feet in Christ's name. When her health finally failed in 1890, she returned to America. She had no money, no property, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. Settling in Chicago, she began to write her story. Her autobiography, An Autobiography, the story of the Lord's dealings with Mrs. Amanda Smith, the colored evangelist, was published in 1893, a 500-page testimony of faith, suffering, and triumph. It sold thousands of copies, inspiring both white and black readers who could scarcely believe how far she had come. But Amanda's story did not end there. She had seen too many abandoned children in her travels, too many girls left with nothing but fear and hunger. So in 1899, at the age of 62, she founded the Amanda Smith Orphanage, an industrial home for abandoned and destitute colored children in Harvey, Illinois. She used her savings and small donations from churches. There were no grand sponsors, only faith again. The orphanage became a refuge for black children who had nowhere else to go, teaching them to read, to work, to pray. It was a place where the broken could find hope, much like Amanda herself had found it years ago. Even as her body grew frail, her voice remained strong. She preached into her 70s, sometimes seated, sometimes leaning on a cane, always singing. She used to say, "If the Lord gives you a song, sing it, even if the world won't listen." In her final years, a philanthropist named George Sebring invited her to live in Florida, building her a small home where she could rest. There, under the warm southern sun, the once enslaved girl from Maryland watched her life come full circle. On February 24th, 1915, Amanda Berry Smith passed away quietly in her sleep. She was 78 years old. Her funeral in Chicago drew thousands, ministers, orphans, believers of every color, all gathered to honor the woman who broke free not just from slavery, but from the limits the world tried to place on her. Amanda Smith's story is not just about faith. It's about defiance, holy defiance in the face of oppression, loss, and limitation. She proved that God's call does not check credentials or skin color. When heaven gives an assignment, no man can cancel it. Her orphanage continued to operate long after her death, nurturing children into adulthood until the 1940s. Her influence lived on through the Holiness movement and through generations of women who saw in her proof that God could use anyone, even a poor black washerwoman, to preach to nations. So when you think of heroes of the faith, remember Amanda Berry Smith. Remember the woman who sang freedom from chains. Remember the voice that crossed oceans. And remember that true power lies not in privilege, but in surrender. This is Amanda Smith's legacy, the journey of a soul that refused to stay silent. If this story inspired you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Subscribe and join others who believe that faith still changes lives, that God still calls ordinary people to do extraordinary things, and that the gospel, like Amanda's song, still carries across every ocean.